We are going to sump this fuel tank. So basically in the vicinity of where the stock fuel pump basket is here, we're going to make a cut and we're going to put an angled baffled sump here so that we can run an external fuel pump up in this area. Kind of as close to the body as we can here because I want this to have some crash protection. So it's kind of yet to be seen exactly where that's going to go. But we do have this hitch, and we also have the stock bumper here so that if we do get rear-ended, which has already happened once, we'll be protected if we keep the pump kind of up in this area in here. So we're probably going to put a 90 somewhere here into a shutoff valve and then to a pre-filter, and then probably loop back around and come to the pump, which will rejoin our 8AN hose up there, which really should be a 10, but we'll see how far we can get on this 8 for now. We are going to run, kind of show you this as we go along, we are going to run a 12AN inlet into the pre-filter and into the pump out of the sump that's going to exist here. And, if you road race a lot, ideally you might put it in the exact center here. And there's a little turbo there trying to help out. Don't lick up that fluid there, turbo. But I want to take advantage of the stock square baffling that's in here. So I'm going to put that piece right under here. So you'd be a madman to try to do this with the tank installed. And so we're going to take the tank out, which on these cars is relatively easy. You got a few nuts back here and then some up front with that shield. You'll have to remove the fuel fill hose. And you'll also have to, of course, take your wires and lines off of the top of the pump, which can be accessed from inside the hatch. Luckily, one of the few things they did that was super nice is, unlike a lot of cars, these actually do have a drain plug in the fuel tank, which is, 12 millimeter head here. So it's too tiny to use for any kind of sump, in my opinion, to support any real performance. But it does make an easy way to get the fuel out of here. And this car currently has about 3/4 of a tank, and so we want to drain all that out and then let the tank, take the tank out and then let the tank probably air out. I'm not sure the exact process we're going to do just yet. Obviously, if you're going to be welding, sorry if I look really strange here, maybe I should just set up. If you're going to be welding on one of these tanks, it's a great idea and to be super safe and make sure there's no fuel residue whatsoever and there's no vapors. There's plenty of stories of people who have gotten blown up trying to weld on gas tanks. So we're probably going to air it out and then let it sit for a day or two and then fill it full of argon to pump all that out. And then I might even just, after it's filled with argon, just toss a match or something in it. Strange as that sounds, and none of this is advice on how to weld your fuel tank, but just to make sure that when we strike an arc with the welder, we don't get our face blown off. But the argon purged through the fill neck, and then we'll leave one line open on the top of the tank. If we let that argon purge for 20-30 minutes, I would think that's going to get most of it out. But we're going to be really sure, and we'll make sure it doesn't smell and things like that. And this is alcohol, so I don't know how volatile the residual fumes will be, but I'm going to assume it's at least as bad as gas, even though it may not be. I want to be super careful. So we're just going to drain this tank out of the car because that's just going to take a lot of the weight out of this. And there's probably no way that I'm going to get this out of here without making a bit of a mess. So we're just prepared for that. We just got the car up on jacks right now. Jack stands. Trying to get this. We got a couple of more tanks here. I think there's 15 gallon in here. See, it's already coming out. I'd like to save on this fuel if we can. And so that's that. So we're just going to have to wait. Smells just like moonshine, really. It's got some of that racy 98 in it yet. I think it is, shoot, I can't remember whose fuel it is, but we got it from Central Speed and Supply at races, and so I'm not 100% sure who made that. Ignite, I think. But it's really nice when you've been driving on a drag and drive and you can top a car off with some E98 to try to get your percentages up. So we don't really do a fuel switch over when we race. It's pretty much exactly the same as we drive around on, except I try to keep the ratio over about 70% if we can for racing. You know, we have flex fuel with this Haltech Elite ECU, and we did it with the Series 2 as well, but it's still it's better not to change your fuel ratios too much, and I like to keep it above 70 just for, you know, knock prevention, things like that. Some research out there has shown that for the most cars, once you start getting it over 60, the benefits start to go down a bit, even though I'm sure when you're pushing the limits, you know, you gotta run straight E98 type stuff. But kind of where we're going, 70 has always been plenty. And it also doesn't stress your fuel system out as much. You know, if you're running actually 85%, then you know that's going to take maybe 5% more fuel than the 70 would. So that's something to consider. I'm certain I'm not going to be able to tell precisely when this gets full, and we're going to have a gusher here, but I'm trying not to. So just waiting along here. I'm sure I'll fast forward this for you guys. So this is what they call the import style fuel tank sump that Summit Racing has, and we also offer as well. This has a 3/4 MPT, dual inlet, outlet, whatever you want to call it. It's an inlet for your fuel pump, and when you're running an external pump, you want to run basically the largest inlet that's like capable of making sense in your setup. So we're going to run a 3/4 MPT to a 12AN fitting, and then that's going to go to a shutoff valve in this region, and then we're probably going to make a corner or something, not sure yet, we'll have to see how it ends up, and we'll run a pre-filter and then the pump somewhere in this area, and then connect that to our line that's already existing going forward right there. Hopefully we got enough length where we don't have to cut that or anything like that, and should be fairly simple. Obviously we got these tech screws in here right now just to sort of hold this so that I can mock this up on the car to kind of make sure I was going to be happy with it. It may be a little low. It is still higher than that control arm, and being at the back of the car, I don't think it's going to drag too much. You know, we got this little guy testing out my new paint here on the bumper. Thanks, buddy. So if he'll get his tail out of the way for just a second. Come on, buddy. I know. It's dirty out here. You really should be inside. He hates being alone. We're going to, you know, weld the perimeter of that, and it's not really a perfect fit here. It fits pretty good at this angle on the stock tank, but obviously up here we got this huge gap, so I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that just yet. We may just put a slice through here and then sort of bend that up, or we may shorten this. I'm not real sure exactly what we're going to do there. I guess we could put a piece of filler here too. There's a number of options we could do. If you're not fabbing one of these up from scratch, you're probably not going to get a perfect fit on your stock tank. So, but we'll take this tank out. We had it out once, and then I realized that I should probably see that this little sump is going to go exactly where it needs to, and put it back in, which luckily on these vehicles there's only 3 bolts there and 2 in the front. You know, once you get the fill tank line off and the fuel pump stuff and the vent stuff and that sort of thing, pretty simple tank to pull in and out, and it doesn't weigh a whole lot. So you probably ask yourself, you know, why don't you just go to a fuel cell at this point? And you sure could, but for the capacity and the size that this tank takes up, you know, you get 20 gallons out of the stock 3S tank here, 3000 GTR Stealth. It's going to be tough to get a fuel cell up in this area that's that big. I think I checked it out once, and it was going to stick down several more inches than the stock tank, which is not, you know, perfect. So you probably have to cut the floor out to really do a good job of it, which just don't want to do, really. This car is by no means perfect, but just kind of draw the line at cutting this whole floor out of here. It would be cool to get rid of this stupid hump here that's where the stock tank has its kind of expansion area for venting, but that would be nice, but I'm just not going to do it right now. Most of this we're not going to need. We're going to keep the stock fuel sender for the tank level for the gauges, which we just run through our CD7 dash. I'm going to plug these off. One of these is a return. I think it's this one. Yeah, I think that's right. I had these labeled, but it isn't holding up very good against the ethanol. So we have a pump in here yet. It's a Walbro Hellcat pump. I think I'm going to leave that in because, you know, for the 1 pound we're going to be carrying around. Would be nice if there's an issue with this external pump at some point, which you can never really preclude completely with anything. We would have a pump capable of still, you know, running a high 10, mid 10, whatever, and driving around on the street and everything else. That would be just a pretty easy plumbing swap to do. So I think I'm going to leave that in there. Now, that pump sitting in there for several years may at some point, you know, refuse to start when we really need it, but it kind of gave me a little peace of mind knowing we got a backup pump in there.
Chris discovered
Sharp?
Sharp.
Chris has gloves, but I don't know if these are really going to help, but hey, anything that'll tear the gloves instead of my skin would be nice. I don't think this is going to come through that hole without some serious butchery, but that's what we do. That's our own stuff, not yours. So that is the stock baffle tank thing. Wants to come out. So it was a really good tank, so you notice I say was. I had the 85 in this for like 12 years, so if anybody's worried about that, stop worrying. Still don't think that's gonna come out. Well. Whew. I'm gonna have to break that other baffle out of there too. Let's try the old assistance here. Yeah, there you devil. Your work is done. You're going to become a cat food can. Hey!
Look at that.
Well, there you go. Yeah, so I guess we got a little bitty baby carriage for Shathi. He might like that.
Oh, he's not over there right now.
No, he's probably out doing something in the rain. It's raining today for once. So that's that. If we gander up in here, kind of my next step is going to be, I guess we might as well keep that thing as long as it's not loose. Seems good. We might want to...
Is that water right there?
Yeah, that's water. I had this rinsed out. We might want to rinse this out again because there's probably no better opportunity to clean the shavings that we created through all this than with this gigantic hole here. Because I don't really want, you know, even though we're going to have some filters, let's give them a chance, you know. So, the way this is going to work is we modified this slightly earlier. And that's going to sit here. So I outlined where it was, and I cut a little bit inside so that there's a little bit of overlap there, which will just make the weld a little bit stronger. And so I had to cut this and make this about a 45 degree here so it followed the contour of this tank. I had used some tech screws just to hold this in place while we were working, but we'll weld those holes up. So yeah, basically once this is cleaned, we'll have to weld the whole perimeter of this, which we're going to have to be careful because of course this is extremely thin And so kind of what I'm going to do is put most of the heat on the sump here and then kind of flow it into the tank here, so I'm kind of weld. The only thing we don't want to do is I'd rather not do 40 million stitch welds because it's probably going to leak. That's the same reason that I'm not doing a MIG. I'm sure you could, but I was a little worried that start and stops with a MIG are going to have some pinholes in them. So we're going to try to TIG weld this and just see how it goes. But I got some plugs for these two holes. We can plug those and we can keep the stock drain here, but I'll shut that up and then we'll just fill it with some water and see if it gets wet on the outside, because that's a lot better to find out now than when we got full of fuel in the car. But yeah, this is going pretty good. We'll have all these parts on the site. This is the kind of import mini style sump kit that you can get in steel, and I think it's going to turn out real nice. But we did have to modify this because normally this is flat, and of course these tanks aren't. And a fella could, if he was so inclined, I probably can't show you, but you could sink this in there and then trim around the edge and cut that and then do a butt weld all the way around to avoid putting this kind of hinge in here. But this just seems like a heck of a lot less work, and I'm going to be happy with the outcome. Whenever we do acceleration, this is the back of the tank, and so all your fuel is still going to slosh down to this low point. And so, you know, is it going to be great for holding a G or something on a road course? I don't know. Probably better than stock, but maybe not. But the main thing is, on a drag launch, we're not going to starve this thing, and we won't have to always run, you know, half or a full tank on a hard launch, because the stock stuff kind of does tend to do that. And again, I did want to keep this, and this just has a little dirt from hosing it out earlier. But I did want to keep this, but it's just not really going to work because I ended up cutting right where it welds to. And I mean, if I was really, really inclined to do it, you could, but I just don't want to take the time to keep that. This kind of serves a lot of the same purpose. It is going to be a little bit lower than stock too. So, you know, obviously when they built this in the factory, they had constraints where, you know, the tank had to be flat on the bottom, I'm certain. And so they couldn't put a sump that came this far down. So hopefully all the fuel just wants to go in there real nice, and we won't have any fuel starvation. And we'll have these gigantic 3/4 pipe threads that we're going to adapt to a 12 AN to go to our gigantic external fuel pump. That's it, Hunter. Hey everybody, today we got a little bit different of a project. Today we're going to be making a lid that will serve as our fuel sender on our Dodge Stealth that we're doing the external FueLab 1800 fuel pump on. I'll show you why we're just going to make a new one of these and what exactly it's going to do for us. So basically, our existing sender has had so many holes I've had to poke in it over the years to try different fuel pump setups, and so much, you know, contamination. We were trying to weld up a hole last night with our MIG welder. Yeah, it's pretty sorry. So this is becoming like, you know, the old ship of Theseus. It's starting to be more weld than anything else. So I am tired of this and it warping and whatnot, and yep, it could be fixed, but I don't think I want to, because all this has to do for us with our external pump is there needs to be a return line and there needs to be a vent, and then something to hold the fuel sender on there, which in the stock format is spot welded to those two little holes we've drilled out. And so we'll have to build something for that little bracket to attach to our lid. But basically this lid is exactly 5 inches across. We have a 5-inch hole saw here, which I wasn't sure was going to be big enough, but we have measured with the gasket here, and this gasket, even after the kerf here, is going to be just about the right size. So as long as, you know, these bolts got a little bit of space here, will be fine, and the sealing surface on the tank is way in here. So I think 5 inches is going to be fine. We got a 6-inch hole saw in case we run into problems, but obviously we'd have to remove a lot of material for that to get that to fit well. So let's try this. We have our lathe here, so we can always turn the outside of that down if we want it to be a little cleaner. And we have this nice thick, I don't know what this is, 3/16 aluminum here. I want to make this out of aluminum because I'm really getting tired of it rusting and warping and all kinds of stuff, and this will just last forever. And we'll be able to just put our fittings on this, and securing the bracketry to hold the float is going to be a little bit tricky because that's steel, and so I'm going to have to think of some way to fasten that. But otherwise, this should be straightforward. We just cut a 5-inch hole in here, take the waste, and that'll be our lid. It'll have a centralized hole in it from the pilot bit. We'll make that big enough to have either our vent or our return, however we want to do that, and then drill another hole for the vent or the return, and then we'll be able to figure out a way to hook the float up to it, and then just drill the 6 little holes to mount to the tank. So all in all, I think it's going to be a little bit simpler to build a new part here than it is to try to save the old one. And I'm not wanting to spend all day today. This is Sunday. I just want to get this going. We got the pump all plumbed in and all wired up. I want to try this, and I'd love to get this done, just get back home. We're at the shop today because we have a few more tools here, you know, little bandsaws, and there's a bigger bandsaw over there somewhere, and blaster and all that stuff. So we can do some stuff if we need to, but let's go ahead and try to cut a cookie out of this and see if that's going to work. Let's back that off and try that again. Just get to where we're not hardly touching this. Might be a little out of round too. Let's see. Okay, we're going to do a little more, and then we'll do a power feed. Okay. Kind of keep feeding that in a few thousandths until I'm happy. Okay. Okay, so I look a little more beat. It's been a long day. I was out doing some yard work today, and also working on this fuel hat for the sending unit on our Turbo Dodge Stealth here. And I wanted to show you how this came out. Obviously, we're not selling these, so if I made these in mass production, I think there's a few things we could improve upon, and we could definitely build them to a little higher standard. But I still think this is a great deal better than the one we took out of it. So let's take a look. So what we got is our aluminum hat now. We have our return line here. This is a 6AN return line, which I think is going to be plenty because we're going to be staging the pump speed, so I don't think it's going to overflow that return anytime soon. We have our 8AN rollover valve inside there that we're going to make a vent out of, and these are a little closer than I should have put them, but there's just not a lot of room here, honestly, because that's as far over as that can go without hitting the tank. Actually, I had to grind a little bit on that rollover valve to get that to fit. But I think if we put our 8AN line on here first with a 90 and then this, I think it'll be fine. Or we'll orient this in a different plane here. It'll be fine. One screw we didn't get in because I cut that previously because it was in the way of something. And since this is thicker, we don't have enough length there. But I think with the stiffness of this really thick aluminum piece here, that's going to be fine. We got our factory ground here, and then we have our 2 pass-throughs here for the float, and that seems to be working just fine. We did bolt the float bracket piece to the thing here, the fuel hat, and that's just one of the things I would have done differently if we had an opportunity. You can see this doesn't look great, but that's going to work just fine. So this will never rust. This will be plenty stiff to seal up, and we got rid of a lot of junk that was on this old one. And yeah, I mean, if I was going to choose between this and that, definitely this was a move in the right direction. Let's show you what we got. Well, first of all, we got little Turbo here. He doesn't make a great shop cat at the shop, but he seems to do just fine at home. So that's where we got Shathid. And now he's climbing in my new seats, so that's great. But anyway, we've been working on this external fuel pump setup. So you can run a siphon tube from the stock sender if you want, but it's really not recommended for these high volume fuel pumps. It's better to run a sump here. So what this sump will help you do is we can have a very big supply line here. This is 12 AN, so it's kind of one of the larger practical line sizes. I'm sure there's big setups out there running 16 AN or something similar, and having this strange cat follow me around everywhere. But 12 AN is really big enough for all practical purposes here. This pump is kind of made to work with either 10 or 12, and so we went with 12 because if we ever do run a bigger pump, you know, it's already here, it's already set up. Most we would have to change is run a bigger pre-filter on our fuel pump. So this is a sump. This is a sump we can make available for you guys. We did have to modify it a little bit to follow the curvature of the tank. So basically I cut it here and TIG welded it back together, and we mitered an angle here. This used to be kind of straight, and so we mitered that angle and had that meet up with the front of the tank here. One mistake we made is it is not recommended to cut the whole bottom of the tank out here, because I presume you can have some fuel sloshing, particularly on braking. You can kind of have that just scoop right out of there, or even on acceleration it might just come through here and flop up the back of the tank. So we didn't want that. So we carefully reached in through the sump hole up top, the stock access hole, and welded back in a floor to this with 4.5 inch holes in it. And that was kind of difficult and not pretty the way that came out, but hopefully it'll keep the fuel in the sump where it belongs. This does have two 3/4 pipe thread fittings here, which we only need one for what we're doing here. So we're just running a plug here. This is gas oil, however you say that. It's a sealant designed specifically for E85 and gasoline. We find it works pretty dang good. So we're running our pipe thread adapter here to a 12 AN male so that we can run our elbow here. And if we ever need to, we can replace this fitting without replacing the threads in the sump, which is kind of nice. If Turbo will get out of the way here, I can show you a little more of this setup. Hey buddy, you're okay. So we have a shutoff valve here from Vibrant, basic 12 AN shutoff valve. The nice thing about the shutoff valve is if we go to service the fuel filter, we don't have to worry about the tank being empty to do that, or we'd have, you know, fuel coming out. What we have next is some 12 AN PTFE Teflon lining fuel line. I like the Teflon line because it doesn't let any fumes permeate, and also it holds up better over time, so you're going to get a greater lifespan out of this typically than anything made out of EPDM or nitrile or any kind of rubber like that. So we go into a Magna Fuel pre-filter here. This has a 75, I think, 74 micron pre-filter in it, which is recommended for this pump. This filter is got a stainless element in it that's cleanable, and also it's kind of set up to flow 3-4 gallons a minute. That's kind of the max that you're going to want to pull through this. If we went to a 5, 7, or a 10 gallon per minute external pump, we would want to go to kind of one of the larger Aeromotive, or I think FueLab makes them too, bigger type of pumps with more surface area. This filter here internally, sorry, it's been a long day. This is just a 90, some more PTFE line. We went to the trouble to weld it's kind of hard to see here, weld a reinforcement plate on this tank, and then a nut to where we can put a 6mm bolt here with an Adele clamp. I'll shorten this bolt or buy something so we don't have this washer stack up here, but obviously if you're just using a nut, your available threads here are very, very small before it starts trying to poke a hole in the tank, which we don't want. But we wanted this Adele clamp because, not that we're listening to Adele, but necessarily, not like anything against her, but that's what they call these rubber coated clamps that have like the tang on it here. We wanted to keep this gap between the fuel line and the muffler. I don't know how easy that is to kind of tell, but that's several inches here, this gap. We may also still line this in some DEI type stuff just to keep this cool, but I don't think we're going to have any trouble. Try to keep this as flat as possible. Got a little touch up to do on this tank. I'm dragging on the ground here. And we have our 12 AN line going on to our FueLab pump, kind of the star of this show. This is the FueLab Prodigy 1800. The 1800 means it's rated for 1800 horsepower, naturally aspirated on gasoline. You're not going to get that out of a boosted application, and E85 chops that down by 35 to 40%. So this, by the time you do all the math, is good for an honest 1,000 all-wheel horsepower. This is about 3.1 gallons per minute. There's a Magna Fuel pump that's highly recommended as well, 7303, which flows about the same as this. But what I like about this is it has, bear with me, I'm at the home shop tonight, whatever time it is, so I don't have a lift here. Pretty simple stuff we got going on jack stands. So the FueLab pump has an integrated speed control. So this is our ground here, and then that's speed control, and then this is power. And so you can actually, try to see if this lens is sturdy here. You can actually trigger this to run full speed. So right now, if this is disconnected, that's full speed. When we connect this, and I got our wires over here, we're going to sheathe. We're going to connect this to the ECU and ground that on a duty cycle, but predominantly we'll be running either low speed or maximum, or pretty high up there, just to keep things simple. So basically, we start going over 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, or we start going over 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds of boost. We'll switch the pump over to full flow, and that will ensure we have adequate fuel supply, but then we're not heating up the fuel, just running it at maximum speed all the time, and then you're obviously going to have a higher noise, things like that. So that's one reason we wanted to run the FueLab Prodigy pump. It's also pretty affordable for what it is. It is more than the Magna Fuel, but it's less than a 5 gallon per minute aeromotive type pump, which would kind of be the next step up. So this has integrated speed control, whereas the aeromotive 3 gallon, as far as we know, brushless pump, does not have integrated speed control. You need a separate module for that. So this was going to get in our fuel range and kind of be simple and allow the speed control, so we don't have to run a fuel cooler, and we also don't have to run a massive return line. So we're just running like a 6 AN return line. So what we did here, you can, love my red wire for a ground here. I at least kind of marked it black. But we wanted to run a heavy ground wire. This is 10 gauge going straight to the body mount here. And over here, though, the trickery kind of begins. Originally, I had just welded studs to the tank, and man, the more I looked at it, the more I was worried. A, about those cracking and leaking, and B, it's just torquing on it all the time. It could break, and I really did not want to do that. The more I looked at it, the more I was like, this looks like we're going to be along the road on a race week fixing this, and I didn't want that. So what we did instead is I took some 16 gauge sheet here, TIG welded that to the tank, the stock tank. Now I welded, I just found some bolts at the local hardware store that are called an elevator bolt. So they have a big round bottom to it. I'll post up some pictures later of the fabrication on this. We welded that to the sheet, and then we're using these rubber isolators here, and then I think it's 5/16 by 18 the lock nut here, so that can't vibrate loose, and we don't have to tighten this up so much that it crushes the rubber to uselessness. And there you go. So now we have the full 4 bolts here for this clamp system that holds this pump to our stock tank. It's just as low almost as the very bottom of the tank. We'd originally planned on mounting this on the rear end bracket, which would have been really nice because it's super sturdy. We welded some bolts to that. We tried that, or we were going to try that. And we reached out to FueLab, and they really wouldn't give a definite that would be okay for it to siphon that high up. So we're like, I don't want to risk any problems, and so we just set this mount up. So that would have been near the top of the tank, where now we're all the way right at the bottom. So this is definitely not going to have any problems. Kind of some of the things I thought about when we're putting an external pump is this safe? You know, is this going to be easy to service? Is this going to make the car worse in any way? It's probably going to be louder than the internal pump, so let's say it's all not a free lunch here. And obviously it's an investment to get a pump like this, but I like that it's in front of the stock tank. So, you know, any collision that was bad enough to damage this pump and cause a leak is probably going to poke a hole in the stock tank anyway, particularly since we put this armor plating on the tank there where that's mounted. I had thought originally about just kind of mounting it in this area. I'm like, that's awful close to the tire. And so what if you have a blowout or anything like that can happen, tear a line off, start a fire, and I've seen a lot of cars catch fire, and it's not a good thing. So we wanted to put the pump somewhere you could reach, which this is very easy to get to. We wanted to put the pump somewhere where the plumbing was simple. I think we've achieved that as well. Pretty easy, pretty short line to get to it. And we wanted to keep the car safe. And just as a minor thing, I wanted to not alter my existing supply line to the engine. And besides changing this from a straight to a curved, this is the same line that we had going to the fuel hat previously. It's an 8AN, which may or may not prove a limitation at some point. If it is, it'll be pretty simple to upgrade this to a 10. No big deal. So there you go. There is our FueLab Prodigy 1800 install. Like I had said in a previous talk, we were going to run a surge tank and 3 fuel pumps total. And I got to thinking about it, and there was just no good way to make it safe for NHRA, because you would have had to build a containment box in the hatch for that to work, with a firewall basically. And it was going to eat up a lot of space in the trunk, and we were going to really be stressing the alternator out trying to run 3 pumps. So I think this is simpler. Yes, it is an investment. Yes, we are a dealer for FueLab, Aeromotive, etc. We can help you with this pump and get this, but it's also got a lifetime warranty. We got the proper pre-filter and everything. We should get a long life out of this, run this at low speed at cruise, and we really should basically be a one-time investment. I know that's never really the case in the long run, but for now. So I hope you like this. Gives you some ideas on what you can do with a fuel sump if you want. This project was not tremendously difficult, particularly I think when you kind of look at one that's been done already and you don't have to sort of figure all this out from scratch. I like it. It was fun. Got to do a little bit of welding and things, and we have a very simple setup by the time we get to the trunk. So in the trunk, I actually fabricated this new top mount plate because we were using so little of the original one and it was so chewed up and old. You can see here, she's looking like Freddy Krueger is having a real bad day on the bottom of the Titanic or something. It's just terrible. So we just took some aluminum with a 5-inch hole saw and cut it out on the lathe and a hole saw and welded our return line. And we also have an 8AN vent. So this is going to have, it has a rollover valve in it. We're going to run a line to that and coil it up to where it's at least as high as the fill and put a loop in it so fuel can't come out. But it also has a rollover valve, so if the car ever gets flipped over in an accident, it's going to shut the flow of fuel off to that. One thing that's overlooked a lot about these tanks is they have a very tiny vent line. So it's basically that little guy. And they actually recommend you run a 1/2-inch 8AN vent line when you got a pump this big or bigger, and that way if you're sucking fuel out of it, you know, air can get in too, and otherwise your pump is basically fighting a vacuum all the time, which is very, very bad for them, and they run a lot of amps and they get hot. You're not going to get the performance you're supposed to out of it. So as you can tell, I'm the kind of guy that tend to lie awake at night thinking about things a lot. And so reading a lot of instruction books, and this is just sort of the methodology I attack to everything. So that's why I usually don't see very fast progress from me when I'm working on my car. Besides the fact that I'm working on it after hours usually, and when I'm already worn out I'm working 10 or 12 hours a day at the shop. I'm just very much, if something doesn't really make me happy the way it's done, I'll go back and redo it. And to me, that's what makes things nice. You know, we could zip tie that pump up in there somewhere and it'd probably go down the road, but it wouldn't be nice and reliable and all that good things, at least as reliable as it can be. So anyway, I hope you liked this little episode on the turbo all-wheel drive automatic GTX 3576 Dodge Stealth shop car we have, and we'll try to keep you further updated. But let us know. Come to our website. We keep updating it. We've got over 400,000 products on it, a bunch of platform areas now. You can browse by your vehicle type and the generation of your vehicle and its brand. Let us know if we can get any revenge on your ride. Well, this wouldn't be much of a video if I didn't show you how loud this pump is. And so take a listen. Here's the car here. This car's pretty loud on its own, but not ridiculous so. You can definitely hear the pump. But I don't think it's really going to be a problem over the sound of the car. You can kind of see when you're sitting in the car, it's just kind of a dull buzz. And this is sort of worst case scenario. The tank's completely empty almost. And the trunk's completely bare. So I think once we get that back in there, we'll definitely be able to live with the noise level on this pump. So the FueLab 1800 Prodigy is pretty loud underneath the car, but if you sit in the cabin, just real mild noise. I don't think we're ever really going to notice it. I put 5 more gallons of fuel in it. This sounds a little bit quieter. You can kind of hear them in certain tones, but I bet when we get the car on the ground and off jack stands and outside, that's going to help too. So far so good. And our duty cycle setup, it seems to be working. I'll kind of share how we set up the Haltech on that a little bit later. Revenge Performance is the place to get the parts and the advice to help right the wrongs on your vehicle. We partner with the industry leaders in parts distribution and warehousing to get you the best possible prices, the widest selection of parts, and the fastest shipping. With our real-time inventory on our website, if we say we have it in stock, it's ready to ship. From us or from our many national distribution partners. With hundreds of thousands of parts available, I guarantee we can get revenge on your ride.